Hi, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. Pretty amazing turnaround of the US markets, both in bonds and also equities. For the week that's just ended, US equities were up just around 5% on the major indices. That's the Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ was up over 6%. Now that appears to be on the back of, earnings were pretty good, but also, really a lot of people are taking heart from what was considered now to be quite a dovish sort of statement from the Fed, which basically was a line that, they're still looking at fighting inflation, keeping interest rates high, but it looks like now that we've seen the peak in US interest rates. So the target range of 5.25 to 5.5 looks like it's here to stay now, and people are now reading potentially with the inflation falling, but also as well some good news on the employment data as well, that non-farm payrolls was expected to be around 170 odd thousand. That came in at 150,000. But also as well a negative revision downwards of about 100,000 over the last 2 months as well. So although you still got a little bit of growth in the employment market, it's not sort of hot and overheating, which takes a little bit of pressure off the Fed. Really on the back of that, 10-year yields have backed off aggressively. They were trading around 5%. They're back currently around sort of 4.58. And the 2-year is well below that 5% now at 4.93. Now, obviously, you've still got the ongoing conflicts out there in Gaza and also the Russian-Ukraine war, which a lot of people seem to be sort of forgetting about now. That Russian-Ukraine war now has been dragging on for nearly 19 months. And it's now sort of, oh, yeah, it's still there. But, there's no sort of sign of any resolution out there. It's sort of grinding to a bit of a stalemate. And as for the Gaza conflict, that's still a sort of full-blown sort of attack mode from both sides, really. But what has been encouraging is that other countries haven't been dragged into it. Now, on the US political front, you've still got the ongoing trial of ex-President Trump, and that's sort of getting quite interesting now because Trump is coming up with sort of whatever he can to try and deflect the sort of blame away from him. Which is quite ironic, really, because the judge has already ruled that he was committing fraud. It's just a question of the severity of it. Now, the fact that the sort of Gaza conflict has been contained just to that sort of local region, has meant that oil hasn't spiked higher and is now back below $80 a barrel. Which is obviously good news on the inflation front for the global economy. With inflation falling in the UK, the Bank of England's left rates on hold there with the base rate at 5.25, and again potentially now looking that is the peak, and people are now starting to talk about the possibility of interest rate cuts in the second half of 2024. Now, in the EU region, while no one's talking about interest rate cuts, it is quite interesting that inflation really has fallen pretty dramatically in some of those countries out there. Germany's looking at sort of 3%. Spain is looking below that level. Some pretty major moves on the downside for EU country inflation rates. And inflation does continue to fall, then there will start to be talk about interest rate cuts in the EU region as well. Now, back in the trend slightly was the Reserve Bank of Australia that, given the slight sort of nudge up in inflation over the last sort of month or so, they did increase the cash rate just by a quarter point. So that takes it to 4.35. Now that's still well below most of the other global central banks around the world. If you look at the US, they're over 5, New Zealand's over 5, the UK's over 5. But even with that recent hike, the Australian economy is still pushing along at a pretty good rate, seeing a little bit of activity out there on the housing market. Obviously the sort of tourists as well coming down and spending quite a bit of money in the Australian economy. Now here in New Zealand, the special votes have now been counted, and that saw National and ACT fall to only 59 seats in the Parliament. And with a bit of an overhang, they now need a majority of sort of 62, 63 out there to be able to form the government. Although there is still the vote in Port Waikato at the end of November, but also as well a couple of recounts because some of the seats were only won by, in one case, by 4 votes, another case by 20. So there are ongoing talks and discussions between New Zealand First, ACT and National to try and form the next government. And really just hope that happens sooner rather than later. But what is quite interesting is that there's quite a bit of activity in the housing market out there. Certainly the clear-out rate of auctions now is sort of picking up. Appears to be a little bit more sort of houses coming to the market, but also they're selling a little bit quicker and also slightly higher prices as well. And what's really interesting is that the number of first home buyers out there is around sort of 25% now of the market. So first home buyers are actually managing to get into the market and get a foothold in the property ladder. Now it's just going to be interesting to see over the summer months what sort of happens in the New Zealand economy. Certainly we're expecting quite a bit of tourism to come through, and they're obviously going to be spending dollars. But also as well, sort of net migrations out there is still running at just over 100,000 for the last 12 months. Now that's obviously a pretty aggressive number and potentially has some inflationary implications out there, but at the same time as well, they have to live somewhere, they'll be working, spending money, paying taxes, etc. So that should be good news for the New Zealand economy. So if you're looking for income options, go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.